Cedar Grove, New Jersey, May 28, 2019, 3:47 p.m. An 88-year-old man in a wheelchair sits outside Murphy's Tavern on Pompton Avenue, 3 beer mugs sitting on the ground beside him after being retrieved from under the blanket across his lap. The tavern manager, Kevin Torres, stands in the doorway, arms crossed, watching the old man with a mixture of pity and disgust. "You're banned," Torres says. "Don't come back here again." The old man doesn't respond, doesn't argue, doesn't even look up. He simply sits there in his wheelchair, in the spring sunshine, staring at the 3 beer mugs on the ground. Mugs worth maybe $15 total at a discount store. Mugs he'd tried to steal because stealing was what he did, what he'd always done, what he would do until the day he died. Kevin Torres goes back inside the bar, shaking his head, thinking about the pathetic old man who just tried to shoplift beer mugs. Torres has no idea who he just caught. Torres doesn't know that the wheelchair-bound man sitting outside his bar, the man who'd attempted to steal $15 worth of merchandise, had once generated $1 million per day in revenue. $1 million per day. Torres doesn't know that the man he just banned from a neighborhood tavern had once worn a $100,000 chinchilla fur coat to a televised championship boxing match, sitting ringside where millions of viewers worldwide could see him. Torres doesn't know that the United States Drug Enforcement Administration had once estimated this man's fortune at $52 million. And Torres definitely doesn't know that this elderly shoplifter, this smiling old man in a wheelchair trying to steal beer mug, was Frank Lucas, the heroin kingpin who'd broken the Italian mafia's monopoly on drug distribution in New York City, who'd controlled an empire that stretched from Southeast Asia to the streets of Harlem, and whose life had been portrayed by Denzel Washington in a major Hollywood film. Frank Lucas. From $1 million per day to stealing beer mugs at age 88. This is the story of the most dramatic financial collapse in the history of American organized crime. But before we get into exactly how Frank Lucas lost everything, if you're interested in true crime stories, the rise and fall of criminal empire, and the real stories behind Hollywood movies, hit that like button right now. Drop a comment telling me which gangster story you want to hear next, and subscribe so you don't miss future deep dives into America's most notorious criminals. Now let's talk about how you destroy a $300 million fortune. March 8, 1971. Madison Square Garden, New York City. The heavyweight championship of the world. Muhammad Ali versus Joe Frazier. The fight of the century. 20,000 spectators packed into Madison Square Garden. Millions more watching on closed-circuit television broadcasts in theaters across America. Celebrities, politicians, mobsters, all gathered to witness what would become one of the greatest boxing matches in history. And in a prime ringside seat, Section A, Row 1, Seat 7, sits Frank Lucas. 40 years old, 5'11", 170 pounds, wearing a full-length chinchilla fur coat that cost $100,000 and a matching chinchilla hat that cost $25,000. $125,000 for a single outfit. To put that in perspective, in March 1971, the median household income in America was $10,500 per year. Frank Lucas wore more money on his body to a boxing match than 12 American families would earn in an entire year. The coat was floor-length, draped over Lucas's shoulders like a royal robe. The fur was pristine, perfectly matched chinchilla pelts that shimmered under the arena light. The hat sat perfectly on Lucas's head, completing an ensemble that screamed wealth, power, and arrogance. Lucas sat in that ringside seat, surrounded by movie stars and mob bosses, and he smiled. He'd made it. He was on top of the world. According to Detective Richie Roberts, who would later lead the investigation that destroyed Lucas's empire, Roberts was at home that night watching the Ali-Frazier fight on television when he saw Lucas in his chinchilla coat. "I'm watching the fight," Roberts recalled in a 2007 interview, "and the camera pans across the ringside seats, and I see this black guy wearing the most expensive fur coat I've ever seen in my life. I'm thinking, who the hell is that? Who's making that much money that they're wearing a $100,000 coat to a boxing match?" Roberts called his partner. "Did you see that guy in the fur coat?" "Yeah," his partner said. "Who is he?" "I don't know," Roberts said, "but I'm going to find out." That coat, that $100,000 chinchilla fur coat, was the beginning of the end. But in March 1971, Frank Lucas didn't know that yet. In March 1971, Lucas was at the absolute peak of his criminal empire, an empire that was generating, by Lucas's own estimates given in multiple interviews between 2000 and 2019, approximately $1 million per day in gross revenue. $1 million per day. According to Drug Enforcement Administration estimates compiled during investigations between 1973 and 1975, Frank Lucas's criminal organization was trafficking approximately 100 kilograms of heroin into the United States per month. 100 kilograms, that's 220 pounds of pure heroin every 30 days. Lucas purchased the heroin in Southeast Asia, in the Golden Triangle region, where Burma, Laos, and Thailand meet, paying approximately $4,000 per kilogram for heroin that was 98 to 100% pure. $4,000 per kilogram times 100 kilograms equals $400,000 per month in purchase costs. Lucas then smuggled that heroin into the United States through methods that have been disputed, some accounts claiming he used military coffin, others claiming he used furniture shipment, but regardless of the method, the heroin arrived in New York. Lucas cut the pure heroin down to approximately 20% purity, which meant 1 kilogram of pure heroin became 5 kilograms of street-ready product. 100 kilograms of pure heroin became 500 kilograms of 20% pure heroin ready for street sale. Lucas sold that heroin to mid-level distributors for approximately $40,000 per kilogram of 20% pure product. $40,000 per kilogram times 500 kilograms equals $20 million in gross revenue per month. 20 million per month equals approximately $666,000. But that's the wholesale level. When Lucas's product hit the streets and was sold in small quantities to individual users, the revenue multiplied significantly. DEA investigators estimated that Lucas's Blue Magic heroin generated between $25 and $30 million per month in total street sale, which equals approximately $1 million per day. $1 million every single day for years. According to financial records seized during raids in 1975, Lucas had purchased or invested in multiple office buildings in Detroit, valued at approximately $2 million. A 7,000-acre ranch in North Carolina, purchased for $1.2 million. Luxury homes in Miami, Los Angeles, Chicago, and North Carolina collectively worth over $3 million. Multiple luxury vehicles, including a Mercedes-Benz, a Lincoln Continental, and a Cadillac Eldorado, and bank accounts in the Cayman Islands containing, according to DEA estimate, approximately $52 million in cash. $52 million in 1975 money. Adjusted for inflation to 2024 values, that's approximately $300 million. Frank Lucas, a man who'd arrived in New York City at age 16 with $50 in his pocket, had built a $300 million fortune by age 44. But Lucas didn't accumulate that wealth quietly. He didn't hide his success. He didn't maintain a low profile. He spent like a man who believed he was untouchable. According to Julie Lucas, Frank's wife, interviewed in 2011 after serving her own prison sentence for drug trafficking, Frank purchased suits that cost between $3,000 and $5,000 each, custom-tailored by designers who worked exclusively for wealthy clients. Frank wore diamond rings, diamond watches, gold chains, all purchased from jewelers who catered to celebrities and athletes. Frank drove luxury cars that he replaced every year, always buying the newest models, always paying cash. Frank wanted everyone to know he had money, Julie recalled. He wanted people to look at him and see success. He'd come from nothing, from poverty in North Carolina, and he wanted the world to see that he'd made it, that he was somebody important. Lucas purchased the ranch in North Carolina and brought his mother to live there, building her a custom home on the property and filling it with expensive furniture and appliances. Lucas bought homes for his brothers, paid for their children's education, provided jobs for family members and friends from North Carolina, creating what he called the Country Boy, a network of trusted associates who handled distribution and security for his operation. Lucas threw parties at his homes, parties attended by athletes, musicians, and local politicians who either didn't know Lucas was a drug dealer or didn't care as long as the parties were lavish and the money kept flowing. Frank lived like a king, said Marcus Perry, a former associate who testified against Lucas in 1976. Perry spoke to federal prosecutors as part of a plea deal that reduced his own sentence. He acted like the money would never stop coming. He acted like he could never be caught. He spent money as fast as he made it, on cars and clothes and jewelry and houses. He lived like he was invincible. But Frank Lucas wasn't invincible, and that chinchilla coat at the Ali-Frazier fight proved it. After Detective Richie Roberts saw Lucas in his chinchilla coat at the Ali-Frazier fight in March 1971, Roberts began investigating the man in the expensive fur. Roberts discovered that the man's name was Frank Lucas, that Lucas lived in Teaneck, New Jersey, in a large home worth approximately $400,000, and that Lucas had no visible legitimate source of income that could support that lifestyle. Roberts also discovered that Lucas was known on the streets of Harlem and Newark as a major heroin dealer who operated independently of the Italian mafia families that traditionally controlled drug distribution in New York. Roberts brought his findings to the Essex County Prosecutor's Office and to the Federal Drug Enforcement Administration, arguing that Lucas represented a significant drug trafficking operation that deserved major investigation. Between 1971 and 1975, Roberts and a team of DEA agents conducted extensive surveillance on Lucas, documenting his movements, his associates, his properties, and his activities. They installed wiretaps on Lucas's phones. They followed Lucas's vehicle. They interviewed informants who provided details about Lucas's operation. They built a comprehensive case file that documented years of drug trafficking, money laundering, and criminal conspiracy. And on January 28, 1975, they executed their raid. January 28, 1975, 6:47 a.m., Teaneck, New Jersey. DEA agents and local police surrounded Frank Lucas's home, a large property on a quiet residential street where Lucas lived with his wife Julie and their children. At exactly 6:47 a.m., agents knocked on the front door and announced their presence. When no one answered within 30 seconds, agents used a battering ram to break down the door and entered the home with weapons drawn. According to the official raid report by DEA Special Agent John Fitzpatrick, agents found Frank Lucas in the master bedroom, still in bed, appearing to have just woken up. Lucas was handcuffed immediately and placed under arrest. Julie Lucas was in the bathroom when agents entered. According to the raid report, when Julie heard agents breaking down the door, she immediately began flushing large amounts of cash down the toilet, attempting to destroy evidence before agents could seize it. Agents stopped Julie from flushing more cash, but she then ran to the bathroom window and began throwing suitcases filled with money out the window into the backyard, apparently hoping the money would scatter and be difficult to recover. Agents in the backyard recovered 3 suitcases containing a total of $237,000 in cash. Agents inside the home recovered an additional $347,000 in cash from various hiding places, including $112,000 hidden inside a bedroom, $78,000 hidden inside kitchen cabinet, $93,000 hidden in the basement inside false bottom storage container, and $64,000 hidden inside children's toys in a bedroom closet. Total cash recovered from Lucas's home, $584,000. In addition to the cash, agents discovered multiple kilograms of heroin in various stages of purity, weapons including handguns and shotguns, extensive financial records documenting Lucas's drug trafficking operation, and documents showing Lucas's ownership or interest in properties across multiple states. Frank Lucas was transported to federal custody and charged with conspiracy to distribute narcotics, a federal crime that carried a maximum sentence of 70 years in prison. 70 years. Lucas was 44 years old. A 70-year sentence meant he would die in prison without any possibility. In the months following his arrest, Frank Lucas sat in a federal holding facility, contemplating his options. Option 1. Remain loyal to his organization, refuse to cooperate with prosecutors, go to trial, likely be convicted based on the overwhelming evidence against him, and spend the rest of his life in federal prison. Option 2. Cooperate with prosecutors, provide testimony against associates and corrupt law enforcement officials, potentially reduce his sentence, and return to freedom while he was still young enough to enjoy life. According to Ron Chepesyuk, author of Superfly: The True Untold Story of Frank Lucas, American Gangster, Lucas made his decision quickly and without apparent moral struggle. Lucas wasn't cooperating out of any sense of justice or desire to expose corruption, Chepesyuk explained in a 2008 interview. He was cooperating purely to save himself. He was facing 70 years in prison. He was 44 years old. Cooperating was the only way he'd ever see freedom again. Frank Lucas became a cooperating witness. Between 1975 and 1977, Lucas provided extensive testimony to federal prosecutors and grand juries about his drug trafficking operations, his suppliers, his distribution network, his financial activity, and most devastating, the corrupt law enforcement officers he'd been bribing for years. Lucas testified about New York Police Department detectives who'd accepted cash payments in exchange for advance warning of investigations and raids. Lucas testified about federal officials who'd facilitated his operations by overlooking evidence or delaying investigations. Lucas testified about other drug traffickers, including associates who'd worked for him and competitors who'd operated parallel organizations. Lucas's testimony led to more than 100 convictions, 100 people sent to prison because Frank Lucas chose freedom over loyalty. According to Marcus Perry, the former Lucas associate who also cooperated with prosecutors, the criminal underworld's reaction to Lucas's cooperation was immediate and hostile. Frank became the most hated man in every prison in America, Perry said in a 1985 interview. Inmates who'd never met Frank, who'd never worked with him, hated him because he represented the worst thing you could be in criminal culture, a snitch, someone who saved himself by destroying everyone around him. But Lucas got what he wanted. In exchange for his cooperation, Lucas's 70-year sentence was reduced dramatically. Lucas was sentenced to time served plus lifetime parole, meaning he was released from federal prison in 1981 after serving only 5 years, instead of 70 years. Frank Lucas walked out of prison in 1981, age 51, a free man, but he was a broke man. When Frank Lucas was released from prison in 1981, everything he'd built was gone. The $52 million in Cayman Islands bank account, seized by the federal government to satisfy court judgments and restitution orders, the office buildings in Detroit, seized and sold, the ranch in North Carolina, seized and sold, the luxury homes in Miami, Los Angeles, Chicago, seized and sold, the vehicles, the jewelry, the furniture, all of it, seized and sold or destroyed. The criminal organization, dismantled, with most of Lucas's former associates either in prison or refusing to work with someone who'd cooperated with prosecutors. The reputation, destroyed permanently in criminal culture, where cooperation with law enforcement is considered the worst possible betrayal. According to Julie Lucas, interviewed in 2011, when Frank was released in 1981, "We had nothing. We lived in a small apartment that I'd rented with money I'd borrowed from family. Frank couldn't get legitimate work because of his felony convictions. He couldn't return to crime because no one would work with him. We survived on welfare and food stamps for months." Frank Lucas, who'd once generated $1 million per day, was living on government assistance. The man who'd worn a $100,000 chinchilla coat to a championship fight was standing in line at government office to receive food stamps and welfare. The man who'd owned properties worth millions was living in a small rental apartment in Newark, New Jersey, sharing space with his wife and children in a building where gunshots were heard regularly and where poverty was universal. But Frank Lucas, despite losing everything, despite serving 5 years in prison, despite being released with nothing, apparently learned nothing from his experience. In 1984, 3 years after his release, Lucas was arrested again. The charge, attempting to sell narcotics to undercover agents. The details, Lucas, now 54 years old, had attempted to sell 1 kilogram of cocaine and 1 ounce of heroin to undercover DEA agents for $13,000. $13,000. A man who'd once controlled a $300 million empire was attempting to make $13,000 through a hand-to-hand drug transaction. According to the arrest report, Lucas had arranged to meet the undercover agents at a diner in Newark. Lucas arrived carrying the drugs in a paper bag. He sat down at a booth with the agents, showed them the drugs, negotiated the $13,000 price, and was immediately arrested when he accepted marked bills from the agents. Lucas had violated his parole, which explicitly prohibited him from any contact with illegal narcotics. Lucas was convicted of the drug charges and sentenced to 7 additional years in federal prison. Frank couldn't help himself, said Richie Roberts, the detective who'd originally investigated Lucas, in a 2007 interview. He'd spent his entire adult life as a criminal. He didn't know how to do anything else. Even after losing everything, even after serving time, even knowing he was under surveillance as a condition of his parole, he went right back to dealing drugs. It's like he was addicted to crime itself. Frank Lucas served his second prison sentence and was released in 1991, age 61. This time, Lucas would never return to prison, but he would also never return to wealth. From 1991 until his death in 2019, Frank Lucas lived in poverty and obscurity in northern New Jersey. He lived on Social Security payment, approximately $1,200 per month. He lived on a small pension from brief legitimate employment decades earlier, approximately $300 per month. He lived on occasional payments from interviews, book royalty, and consulting fees related to the 2007 film American Gangster, payments that totaled perhaps $10,000 to $15,000 per year in good years. Total annual income, approximately $30,000 per year for a man who'd once made $1 million per day. According to Julie Lucas, Frank's health declined throughout the 1990s and 2000s. He developed heart problems, respiratory issues, and mobility problems that eventually confined him to a wheelchair after a car accident in the mid-2000s. By 2016, Lucas could no longer live independently. He moved into an assisted living facility in Cedar Grove, New Jersey, a facility that cost $1,800 per month, paid for by Medicaid and by small contributions from family members. But even in his 80s, even confined to a wheelchair, even living in an assisted living facility on government assistance, Frank Lucas apparently couldn't stop himself from stealing. According to staff reports from the Cedar Grove facility and from local businesses where Lucas was a regular visitor, Lucas was caught shoplifting multiple times between 2016 and 2019. July 2016, Lucas was caught attempting to steal a newspaper from a convenience store. The newspaper cost $1.50. Staff reported that Lucas had hidden the newspaper under his wheelchair blanket. November 2017, Lucas was caught attempting to steal a candy bar from a drugstore. The candy bar cost 99 cents. Store security observed Lucas placing the candy in his jacket pocket and confronted him before he could leave the store. March 2018, Lucas was caught attempting to steal a magazine from a bookstore. The magazine cost $4.95. Staff reported that Lucas had hidden the magazine under his leg in his wheelchair. And on May 28, 2019, 2 days before his death, Lucas was caught attempting to steal 3 beer mugs from Murphy's Tavern. The mugs were worth approximately $15 total. The bar manager retrieved the mugs from under Lucas's wheelchair blanket and banned Lucas from the establishment. On May 30, 2019, at approximately 11:23 a.m., staff at the Cedar Grove assisted living facility found Frank Lucas unresponsive in his room. Emergency medical personnel were called and arrived within 7 minutes, but Lucas was pronounced dead at the scene. The official cause of death was listed as natural causes related to congestive heart failure and complications from various chronic health conditions. Frank Lucas was 88 years old. He died with approximately $800 in a bank account, according to public records filed during a state proceeding. $800. The man who'd once hidden $52 million in Cayman Islands bank accounts died with $800 to his name. The man who'd once purchased a $100,000 chinchilla coat died owning 3 pairs of pants, 4 shirts, 2 pairs of shoes, and a wheelchair, according to the inventory of his personal effects. Lucas's funeral was held at a small chapel in Newark. Approximately 30 people attended, mostly family members. No former criminal associates attended. No celebrities attended. No representatives from the film industry attended. Frank Lucas was buried in an unmarked grave at a cemetery in New Jersey. The grave remains unmarked because his family couldn't afford a headstone. The trajectory of Frank Lucas from $1 million per day to stealing beer mugs at age 80 represents one of the most dramatic financial collapses in American criminal history, but it also represents universal lessons about wealth, character, and the consequences of poor decisions. Lesson 1. Wealth built on illegal activity is temporary. Lucas generated $300 million through drug trafficking, but that wealth disappeared the moment law enforcement discovered his operation. No amount of money hidden in offshore accounts could survive government seizure. No properties purchased with drug money remained in his possession after conviction. Illegal wealth is always vulnerable to total loss. Lesson 2. Displaying wealth publicly invites investigation. The $100,000 chinchilla coat at the Ali-Frazier fight was the single decision that destroyed Lucas's empire. That coat made Detective Richie Roberts ask the question that led to years of investigation. If Lucas had accumulated wealth quietly, maintained a low profile, avoided public displays of expensive possessions, he might have continued his operation for decades, but ego and the need for external validation destroyed him. Lesson 3. Betraying others to save yourself destroys you in different ways. Lucas served 5 years instead of 70 because he cooperated with prosecutors, but that cooperation meant he could never return to criminal activity because no one would work with someone known for betraying associates. Lucas bought his freedom by destroying his reputation and his ability to generate future income through crime. Lesson 4. Character flaws that make you successful as a criminal prevent you from succeeding after crime. The same characteristics that made Lucas successful in drug trafficking, his ruthlessness, his willingness to take risks, his inability to follow rules, his need for external validation, made it impossible for him to succeed legitimately. He couldn't work a normal job because he couldn't follow orders. He couldn't accumulate money legitimately because he couldn't resist the temptation to steal. His criminal character was permanent. And lesson 5, some people never change, no matter how severe the consequences. Frank Lucas lost everything. He went to prison. He lost his freedom, his wealth, his reputation. He was released with nothing. He went back to prison. He was released again with nothing. He lived in poverty for 30 years. And on the final week of his life, he was still stealing, still unable to resist taking things that didn't belong to him, even when those things were worthless beer mugs, and even when he had nothing to gain from stealing them. Frank Lucas spent 88 years on Earth. He spent approximately 10 of those years generating massive wealth through heroin trafficking. He spent approximately 12 of those years in federal prison. He spent approximately 28 of those years living in poverty, declining health and obscurity, surviving on government assistance and small pensions. And he died trying to steal $15 worth of beer mugs, because stealing was what he did, who he was, what he would always do until he died. From $1 million per day to stealing beer mugs at age 80. That's Frank Lucas. That's what happens when illegal wealth, poor decisions, character flaws, and an inability to change combine over a lifetime. That's how you lose everything and end up with nothing. That's how you go from chinchilla coats and championship fights to wheelchair blankets and beer mugs. That's the real Frank Lucas story.